Introducing an all-new channel, JG9 News, where we talk all things NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format. Newest videos are up now, including the Carolina Panthers firing their GM and Jaguars head coach Doug Peterson blaming injuries for the team's collapse. So go check those out if you haven't already. And now, on with our feature presentation. There are many benefits to playing a playoff game at home, and I think that goes without saying. You get to stay in your routine, and don't have to waste time traveling or worry about staying at a hotel. You get to play in weather that you're probably accustomed to throughout the season, or play in an environment that you're familiar with. And one of the big ones, you get to play in front of your home fans. When you run out of the tunnel on the day of the playoff game, you know that just about everyone in the stadium is on your side. They'll be loud when you're on defense. They'll be quiet when you're on offense. They'll cheer when things are going well. They'll support you every step of the way. They'll try to intimidate the opposition, and they'll try to be on your side and help you advance to the next round and keep this great season of yours alive. It makes sense that if you are a team playing at home in the playoffs, that you want to create as big of a home field advantage as possible. And while some teams might go a bit too far in that regard, through the use of zip code bans to restrict visiting fans from buying tickets to the game, for the most part, I think we can all agree that teams trying to create a home field advantage for their team that is fair and that doesn't screw over other fans in the process is good. Which is what makes the controversy in today's story during this game that you've been watching this whole time all the more ridiculous and insane. Because of all the non-stories that became a story somehow, this was one of them. Because in the 1974 divisional round of the playoffs, the Pittsburgh Steelers hosted the Buffalo Bills. Seeing as the teams meet in the playoffs this weekend if you're watching as of this video, this feels like a good time to bring this story up. And the Steelers tried to create a home field advantage by doing something that, on the surface, seemed extremely reasonable and seemed extremely commonplace. And to say that the Bills, or at the very least, members of the Bills that were impacted by this took offense to this, would be putting it lightly. And much like there was a clear winner on the field, there was a clear winner off the field with this one as well. Because this is the story behind what might just be, considering the circumstances, one of the dumbest playoff controversies of all time. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, we need some context to understand this team right here, the fans involved, and the game that this team right here was about to play, and its importance not just on the season, but for the franchise's history. The year is 1974, and this team right here, the Buffalo Bills, is taking the NFL by storm. For the past few years, Buffalo had been one of the laughingstocks of football. From 1967 to 72, this was a team that had won 4 or fewer games every year, finishing with a combined record across those 6 seasons of 17-64-3, meaning that they won just 20% of all the games they played. It was one of the worst stretches for any team of all time. If we count playoff games, if the Miami Dolphins went winless from 1967 to 71, they would still have as many wins as the Bills across those 6 years. But things were starting to turn around, and after a 9-5 season in 1973 where they narrowly missed the playoffs, the Bills, under the guidance of head coach Lou Saban, did what they hadn't done since the merger, and hadn't done since 1966 when they were in the American Football League: make it to the postseason. Buffalo ended the 1974 season with a 9-5 record, and at one point, they were 7-1 and in the driver's seat. After a stunning victory on the opening Monday night of the season against the Oakland Raiders, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, they went on a stretch where they won 6 straight games and played some awfully good football. Led offensively by star running back O.J. Simpson, who had over 1,100 yards and was named an AP First-Team All-Pro and a Pro Bowler for the 3rd straight season, and led defensively by a vaunted secondary featuring Tony Green and Robert James, who would combine to have 12 interceptions and who would each be named an AP First-Team All-Pro on a top 5 defense in just about every category. The Buffalo Bills were not a team to be messed with. And further efforts, for having an offense and a defense that finished in the top half of the league in points, The Bills had a date with the Pittsburgh Steelers on the road at Three Rivers Stadium in the divisional round. For those wondering why the Bills didn't play the Raiders in this game, even though the Raiders have the best record in the AFC at 12-2, and the Steelers have the third best record at 10-3-1, and why the playoffs weren't the Raiders against the Bills and the Dolphins against the Steelers, there was a really stupid rule back in 1974 that would thankfully be eliminated after the season, where all of the playoff matchups were predetermined, and there was no such thing as seeding. It's the same reason why the Miami Dolphins, despite going undefeated in 1972, had to play the AFC Championship against the Pittsburgh Steelers on the road. Really dumb rule, but that's besides the point. The point is that Bills at Steelers was your divisional round game. And understandably, there were a lot of Bills fans who were excited about this game, seeing as it was the first playoff game for the team in nearly a decade. Heck, seeing how close Buffalo is to Pittsburgh, relatively speaking, with the two cities only separated by about 200 miles, and seeing how we knew that this matchup was happening for a few weeks now due to the predetermined nature of the postseason and the fact that the Pittsburgh Steelers ran away with the AFC Central at the end, there were a lot of Bills fans that were thinking about making the trip and driving down to Pittsburgh to watch the game unfold and maybe be a part of history. And this didn't just pertain to the fans. It also pertained to these girls right here, as in the cheerleaders, known as the Buffalo Jills. There were quite a few teams that had cheerleaders back in 1974, and the Buffalo Bills were one of them, with the Jills having been around since 1967, meaning that this was, quite literally, the first season ever that the cheerleaders were here for a playoff appearance. The Jills were a lot like other cheerleading groups. This group consisted of 17 regulars and 4 alternates, and they would be there at every home game, rooting for the Bills and coordinating cheers and doing dances and whatnot. So long as you were married and you were between the ages of 22 and 32, you could apply to be a Jill. Yes, you had to be married, presumably because the Bills were scared that if you weren't, you would try to get with one of the players on the team. And yes, this is highly sexist, and today in New York State is highly illegal, as you cannot discriminate based off of marital status in the state. But that was the life of a Buffalo Jill back then. No matter how good or bad the team was, no matter the weather or the temperature, and no matter the circumstances, you could bet your bottom dollar that the Jills, like every other cheerleading squad, would be there at Orchard Park, cheering on their team and trying to energize the crowd however they could. And with the Bills playing this playoff game in Pittsburgh during this game right here, the Jills made a request to the Steelers. Can we be on the sidelines for the game? Can we be on the Buffalo sideline and do our thing, leading the crowd in cheers and trying to pump everyone up and show our support? Can we be on the field for this game, since we are a part of the team? And as you might have been able to guess, in an incredibly common sense move, the Steelers said, "Are you crazy? Absolutely not." Think about it. In the NFL, when's the last time that you saw opposing cheerleaders at the game? This isn't college football, this is the NFL. I've been to plenty of Jacksonville Jaguars games in my lifetime, both in Jacksonville and on the road. And I've never seen the Jags cheerleaders at a road game, nor have I seen the visiting cheerleaders in Jacksonville. Just to make sure I'm not going crazy, I looked at the audition guide for various cheerleading teams across the league, and they all say that cheerleaders do not travel to away games. Here's just one of them, courtesy of the Atlanta Falcons. You can see it right there. The purpose of cheerleaders is to pump up and encourage support for their team. So why would the home team ever allow the road team to bring their cheerleaders to do that? If you're the Steelers, why would you ever allow an organized cheerleading group to stand on a sideline chanting, "Let's go Buffalo"? It just doesn't make any sense. And it especially doesn't make sense considering the fact that the Steelers were one of the teams that didn't have cheerleaders, and hadn't had since the merger. To this day, the Steelers do not have cheerleaders. They're one of the last holdouts. So you were going to have nobody on the sideline to cheer on the Steelers, but you'd have people on the sideline to cheer on the Bills for a game in Pittsburgh? Yeah, it doesn't add up. And look, if this is where the story ended, then let's be honest, this is a complete non-story. It never hurts to ask for permission. The worst they can say is no. The Jills tried to be at the game. The Steelers said no way. And if that was it, then alright. But the Jills wouldn't let this issue die. They kept calling the Steelers and trying to contact the Steelers, trying to get permission to stand on the sidelines and cheer. They kept pestering the Steelers to do this. And every time, the Steelers, understandably, said no. As Joanne Meyer, the director of the cheerleading squad, said on this, "It's the Steelers' ball, and they're calling the signals." Meyer said that the Jills had been preparing for this routine for weeks, and that the Steelers were preventing them from being able to perform it. Which, I mean, that's a horrible excuse. It's like if I say I've been preparing a spectacular one-man interpretive dance routine for the Super Bowl at the 50-yard line of Allegiant Stadium this year, and I complain and cry foul when the NFL says, "You can't do that." Just because you work hard for something that you were never even granted permission to do in the first place doesn't give you the right to complain when that permission isn't given to you. But finally, after what felt like countless attempts, and after constant badgering, the Steelers finally let the pigeon drive the bus. No, the Jills couldn't stand on the sideline, but the Steelers gave the Jills permission to go to the game and to stand outside the gate in their uniforms. If the Jills wanted to go to this game that you've been watching and then sit with the Buffalo fans attending it, they had every right to do that, and the Steelers would let them perform outside the stadium gates. And guess what Joanne Meyer and the Jills said to the Steelers on this compromise? "How dare you? You are extremely sexist for even suggesting this idea." Said Meyer, "I asked him if he meant we were going to stand around outside the stadium half-dressed doing nothing. Men don't realize how cold it is in short skirts like that if you aren't performing. So wait a second, time out. You asked the Steelers permission to cheer for the Bills. The Steelers say, no, you can't stand on the sideline, but if you want to be in uniform and do it outside the stadium, you can. And your response is, but it's cold and our uniforms are short skirts, and you don't understand how bad that would be for a woman because you're a man, and you're being incredibly sexist." Like, all the Steelers said was, if you want to be in uniform, you can. And that was the response you went with? What else were the Steelers supposed to say? You think they know what your uniform is, or care at all what it is? Again, the Steelers don't have a cheerleading squad. They view cheerleading as unessential. They had bigger things to worry about. All they said was, you can show up in uniform and do what you want to do outside the stadium. Where was the sexist part in that? Where was the part where we're supposed to be outraged at how unfairly the Jills were being treated? The Steelers just basically said, wear what you would wear to the game, or wear what you want, or wear what fits the occasion. And you're taking offense to that? I'm actually in awe. Imagine if you're a business owner and the Girl Scouts want to do some sort of lemonade sale in your establishment, and you say, well, you can't do that, but if you want to do the sale outside our front door in your uniforms and whatnot, go right ahead. And the Girl Scouts took offense to that completely innocent statement. That's what this was like. Especially because if you're the Jills, you could always, just coordinate a different uniform, right? I highly doubt that the Steelers said that you had to show up to the game in short skirts. First off, they can't police that. And second off, there's no NFL rule that says you can only have one cheerleading outfit per season. You could have all shown up in winter coats and whatnot. You made this a way bigger controversy than it needed to be, and tried to make the Steelers out to be the bad guys, when that could not be further from the truth. The Steelers responded with Joe Gordon, the team's publicity director, saying on the matter and the insane controversy, "We don't have cheerleaders because we don't feel they serve any meaningful purpose. We won't grant permission to the Jills to have 20 or 25 people on the field. We told them that they could stand outside the gate where the Buffalo fans will enter, then sit in the stands with them." Again, perfectly reasonable stance to take. We're not going to have extra people on the field, especially during a playoff game, especially people that our own team doesn't even have, and especially when this is nowhere close to league policy or customary. But if you want to go to this game that you've been watching this whole time, you're more than welcome to. We can't stop you from doing that and being like every other fan. And the Jills said no to that and cried foul, accusing the Steelers of being sexist for not just preventing them from being on the field, and for not just denying them the chance to show off their routine that they've been prepping for a while, which is a stupid reason in itself, because if the Bills miss the playoffs on the final day of the season, it's not like they get the chance to do that routine anyway. It's not like they'd be showing up to a random team's game and perform it just because they practiced for a while, because there were a bunch of other teams and cheerleading squads in the same exact boat. But for suggesting that they show up to the game in whatever their attire is, whatever that may be. How this was a controversy, especially back in 1974, I don't know. I give up. It's probably a good thing that the Buffalo Bills cheerleaders, the Jills, did not waste their time out in the cold and go to the game between these two teams behind me right here. Because when all was said and done, this game was not even close. The Steelers completely dominated, winning it by a final score of 32-14 and leading by 4 possessions at the end of the first half. Pittsburgh had double the total yardage about and nearly double the first downs that the Bills did. And Franco Harris had one of his signature playoff games, as he finished the day with 3 rushing touchdowns. The Steelers would go on to make the Super Bowl that year and would win Super Bowl IX, winning their first title in franchise history. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. For the Buffalo Bills, this was the end of their season, and the next time they would make the playoffs was in 1980. By that point, the Steelers had won 4 Super Bowl titles and had created one of the greatest dynasties of all time. So it's very clear to see which team came out on top in this one. As a side note, the helmets in these 2 rows, they're arranged for a very particular order. These 8 teams, very particular order as to why they're arranged in that way. If you think you know the reason behind why those helmets are there and the exact order that they represent, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Just to recap this ridiculous controversy and story and what it boils down to. The Steelers denied the request of the Buffalo Bills cheerleaders to be on the sideline and cheer at Three Rivers Stadium, and they accused the Steelers of being sexist and unfair. If that sounds like one of the dumbest controversies you've ever heard of in the playoffs, that's because it is. It absolutely is. There have been a lot of dumb controversy to take place during the postseason, but this has to be up there with one of the dumbest. Because the idea of the home team not allowing the visiting team to bring its cheerleaders, when no home team in their right mind would actually accept the offer, and when you can bet that if the game was in Buffalo and the Steelers had cheerleaders, that the Bills would do the exact same thing if the Steelers made that request, shouldn't be a story. It really shouldn't be. But back in 1974, for some reason, it absolutely was. Because on this December day during the divisional round of the playoffs in 1974, the Steelers told the Jills, much to their dismay, 2-4-6-8, appreciate outside the gate. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.